Hi, it's Chris Moore with Senior Remodeling Experts. Welcome to Aging in Place is a Team Sport. It's a video series where we talk to different providers. We explore how families, professionals, and communities can come together to help older adults live safely, comfortably, and independently at home. I'm here to guide you, connect you with the right resources, and help make the rest of your life the best of your life.
Welcome back to Aging in Place is a Team Sport. My name is Chris Moore with Senior Remodeling Experts. And my guest today is Douglas Katz. And Douglas, welcome to Aging in Place is a Team Sport.
Thank you.
And I am going to let you introduce yourself and give us some background and what your position is on the Aging in Place team.
Fantastic. So I grew up in Michigan, went to West Point, served in the military for 5 years in Colorado in the 4th Infantry Division as an artillery officer. So part of my aging in place involves hearing aids. And then went into the corporate world, worked in the rail industry initially, but then moved into technology in the telecom industry. And before I became an entrepreneur, I was in the lending industry for about 25 years. So then I became an entrepreneur. I found it was where my heart was, and on the invention side more than anything. So currently I have in market an adaptive knife, which is a little bit of what today I think is a good part of our discussion, and a a bistro table for golf carts and UTVs where people can enjoy a spontaneous picnic or anything on their golf cart. With a lot of them have the benches on the back that lacks some functionality in terms of being able to use the vehicle fully. And then have expanded that a little bit into speaking on ability and how we look at ability and disability, which I think really talks on aging. And we can get into that a little bit later. Created a model that I call the ability curve that basically looks at how your capabilities change throughout a life cycle. Because we tend to look at ability and disability, and in a way aging, very linear, very binary, very black and white, versus looking at it as a path, a journey that we're all going to follow. And we'll all have our differences, but Father Time and Mother Nature win, and we will all have needs that will need to be met. And I think to segue into what your podcast is about, that aging in place, I think, is understanding some of that. So never expected to really be in the ability disability space, but designed the knife for myself. And in many ways, it being the result of disabilities gathered through aging, my army time in athletics and martial arts, and really looking at critically at how do you prevent that stuff from happening. So that's kind of the big brushstroke, but I can go into any more detail if there's anything that interests you.
Douglas, tell me about the knife, what it does that regular knives do not do. And I bet you're going to show me one.
I forgot to have it ready. And wait, let me grab something else real quick. Traditional knife, you could tell we were talking about my ADHD before. Traditional knife is linear, and this isn't bad. This is what has created civilization. Every civilization has one, and it's usually tip, blade, transition, which is either a handguard or a bolster typically, and handle. And this was, one of the first tools. And it needed to look like this because you might have to catch your food and prepare and eat your food. So you had to have a multitasker, and you couldn't mass produce steel. So multifunctionality was incredibly important for a tool like this. But the only way it's aligned is this. So if you look, my elbow to the tip is aligned. So if I'm transferring force with a linear geometry, this is the most direct and efficient transfer of force, which makes sense. If this was your self-defense, your hunting, everything, this is more important than this usually. You have to, catch your meal before you cut it and prepare it.
For those of you that are audio only, Douglas is holding the knife and thrusting it forward, back and forth. And
I apologize. I wasn't sure if there was only audio.
It is video, but some people may be just audio only. So we're going to try to accommodate.
I'll tailor what I'm trying. But if you're trying to cut now, that linear geometry becomes an albatross, because now you can see immediately my hand tightens. I'm trying to transfer downward force through a rigid line to here, and it works. I may have to saw. A curved blade does help, but generally I'm working against physics and geometry. And if I have to grip this, now all my strength goes here. My kinetic chain ends right here. Now, a chef holds a knife like this. They adapt their body to the knife. And you can see it provides a geometry more straight to the blade. But this is hard to do. And when we're talking about aging in place, for those of you listening, you can see like it's a chef's pinch, I think is something of how it's described. But basically, it's grabbing the spine of the knife. And this works well to some degree, but this takes years of learning. And as you get older, we're talking about aging. I have arthritis where I can do, I could bench press, let's say, but fine tasks, if I'm having arthritis issues, very difficult. So this kind of grip is tough. What we did with the Nulu, which the name comes from the ulu, and the ulu is an Inuit knife. It was the woman's knife. It was the everything knife is what they called it, because men hunted. They had something more linear like this. Women did more of the tasks of preparing, cutting hair, doing all the different things that you would do. And an ulu, though, is sort of just a crescent blade with a handle above it, which is intuitively a great knife. And I had played around with a couple of designs, but then I said, well, why is it a better knife? And it goes from being a linear geometry to a circular geometry. And now what you can see is my line of force, my vector, is aligned with the blade, which means when I'm cutting that I am able to, and this is obviously a very different, if I was standing at a counter, but now you can see I don't even really have to grip the knife. I can actually cut direct force transfer from my forearm to the blade. And if I have any limitation, I can find somewhere along this crescent shaped blade to be able to force transfer the right way. Or if I'm chopping, it might be one grip, or I can maybe move it a little bit and I could slice in this direction. We also added, this is where we're patent pending, this heel blade allows you to chop or slice this way if you get fatigue in your wrist and your hand. But what we did by putting the point of connection here, it also means that where an ulu is ambidextrous, but it's a mirror image of each other. So you really don't get any functionality. You can kind of use it in any direction, but by putting the handle or how it's connected differently, now this has more of a cleaving motion, but a very, very efficient one and more detailed cutting. And you don't have to grip it. So my partner gets really mad when we're doing photo shoots because I actually grip it like this. And that long explanation really speaks to where the benefit comes. Because an inability to cut, whether it's because you've got upper extremity issues, which is what I designed it for, whether you need to be seated when you're cutting, or vision impairment, this benefits every type of those challenges, I'll say, or disabilities. I guess we can throw it out as disabilities. So what we have found is that when we began to size the market, it was essential to bring in seniors. Because seniors, I actually call age a chronic condition. And it's funny, seniors are our largest purchasers on Amazon. It's where there is no adaptive category. Arthritis, seniors, those kind of keywords are the ones that are resonating. So I think it's resonating in that community. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's very interesting because that looks a lot like a chopper that belonged to my grandmother. The only difference is yours is open on one side and hers was closed on both sides, but it was a wooden handle with a chopper and a wooden bowl, and she used it to, chop walnuts and what have you. And very, very similar to what you're showing there. And that never really thought about any of what you have just said with regards to, but the way the handle lines up with the blade, that it's directly below it.
Yeah, and you
as
can even look.
Yeah.
You can see how the alignment is right there.
Yeah.
So it really is an extension of your hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, that's quite all right. One of the illustrations I've been using recently in saying that disability is not inherently an inability to do something. Disability is a disconnect between your ability and the environment in which you're operating. And the illustration I use is if I walk up to a house and the steps of that house are 7 feet tall instead of 7 inches tall, then I am disabled in relation to that house because I can't climb 7-foot tall steps. And
you nailed it. It.
And I think that illustration, really brings it to bear, just like, someone who's not ambulatory, whether they're in a wheelchair or whether they're in a rollator or what have you, A 7-inch step is a disability to them. A 7-inch step is not a problem to me, but it's non-negotiable to someone using a wheelchair. And so
100%.
how many of our homes, how many of the features in our homes are an impediment to people with different abilities?
Yeah,
And
well, and we actually created a model around that. That the ability curve that I was talking about. One of the things that's a through line on a lot of that is what I learned in the Army is how you evaluate is what's the task, under what conditions, under what standards, and it's usually pass fail. And with what you're talking about, it's like you're reading it back to me because in many ways disability becomes an identity and not a list of tasks where you need a little bit of a boost. And as a result, we don't look at it the right way because it becomes a stigmatized word. But the interesting thing is that people don't realize that you're a second away from a diagnosis or an accident, or a number of years away from having your own limitations manifest. And what happens, I think, is people think in terms of I can make small changes myself of what I do and how I approach it without thinking of some of the benefits of an adaptive technological thinking, and then all of a sudden it hits them like a brick when they can't do something. So that becomes an immediate change, and sometimes that happens, right? An accident, stroke, a fall, or whatever. But generally, if you ease into it and say, okay, I can't do this as well anymore, are there things that will allow me to perform that task under different conditions to the same standards that I was used to be able to make a meal or walk up steps or do all that? And that's the key, I think, is that's how you don't give up, right? That's where all the help is.
let's circle back for a moment to your statement about disability being an identity. I think that so much of what we are able to do revolves around what our belief system is. And if we believe that something is impossible, there's an illustration in my book that it says, is it a brick wall or is it a locked door? When we come to an impasse in whatever arena and whatever we're trying to do in our life and we can't move forward, if we view that impasse as a locked door and it's a matter of finding the right key to open that door, as opposed to a brick wall that is pretty much impassable, opens so many doors of opportunity to, instead of saying I can't, we begin to say, how can I? Who do I need to
Oh, 100%.
become in order to be able to overcome this challenge? Or what tools or what resources do I need to avail myself of to overcome this challenge?
Well, and I think you hit on a really good point there where the locked door isn't what you think it is sometimes. And I
Hmm.
think part of the locked door, I actually just wrote an article about this, is the locked door right now in this area. Because whether it's aging in place, which really is understanding the array of abilities and disabilities that you have, and how those are ever changing to be able to still continue as close a lifestyle as what you had before. There's a lack of good products and a lack of awareness on all of the products. So the article I wrote was, there are no kitchen, like, let's say, you look at like all the reviewers of kitchen items. If you were to see magazines or TV shows or whatever, none of them have anything specific to adaptive or an adaptive scoring, let's say, for a particular product. Where when you look at the size of the market and when you look at AARP, how big AARP is. AARP is like their own incubators, right? They're putting money into this stuff, but a lot of it is purely tech. A lot of it is purely software and really, really high tech stuff. There's a lack of like really good simple products that provide the huge impact of simple changes. So part of us coming up with this model is to say to people, it's okay. We're all on a particular curve. And it's not like everybody's here and you're going this way and all of a sudden there's a big gap. And when people can come to accept that, I would hope that the demand can unlock that door. And the demand can say, we want better kitchen products for older people to control their eating, eating anti-inflammatory or whatever. And all the things. I'm kind of kitchen based, but all those things that are small improvements that really skin the cat in a way that makes people not feel lesser. And I think that's the challenge. That's what'll open the door if we can ever get there as a society.
Yeah. Well, I like what you say about demand, and I have that conversation a lot because being in the housing space, I have conversations with people, why don't builders build homes that have zero step entries, that have accessible bathrooms, that have non-slip flooring, that have, and the list goes on and on. And the answer in my mind is because the buying public has not been loud enough in demanding those features, because if the public demands them, if the vast majority of people are not going to buy a house unless it has such and such feature. I mean, if you built the house without any bathrooms, right, nobody's going to buy it.
Right, right.
Supply and demand. So that level of demand needs to be brought to bear in the housing market. The awareness needs to continue to increase to the point where the buying public walks up to a house that's for sale and says, "Oh, there's no zero step entry. I'm not buying this." And at that point, then the builders will start building houses with zero step entries.
Well, and I'm guessing renovations are the same way. Like I've done several projects myself. I was used to be in real estate, and it's interesting. And I never thought about it until you just said it. If you're doing a major rehab, why would you? And you plan on staying in that house, why would you not rehab it in a manner thinking 3 decades into the future in terms of those changes? And I don't think people do that. So it's interesting. Like I look at myself sometimes going, hey, I did the same thing.
Well, in my estimation, the primary reason for that is that so many people have a very negative perception of what it means to grow older. And so they don't like to think about it. And so the idea of when they're remodeling their home, maybe they're remodeling their kitchen because it's out of date and they want more lighting and they want better appliances and they want, some upgrades to be more comfortable.
Right.
And then you bring up to them, well, what if we do a roll under cooktop, and what if we do a roll under sink? And they look at you like you have two heads, because they don't want to think about a time when they may have to cook sitting down, because to them that brings up overtones of frailty and weakness and sickness. But in my work and in my research, I see so many people who are in their 80s and 90s and hundreds who are still quite active and who are, overcoming that slippery slope of decline. So much of how we experience aging has to do with our own choices, with our own perception, our mindset, our mind work, our habits, our lifestyle, so on and so forth. The numbers I've seen are.
One thing that's really interesting about what you just said is what we come. And my dog's having a nightmare, so I'm sorry if that makes noise in the back.
Can't hear a thing.
But it's because there's no template of that fulfilling life the same way. So people's view of age is many times in the window looking into a facility where they've put their parents or grandparents, and they look and they don't look and say, wow, grandma, maybe in some cases, but it's not the norm. Wow, grandma had a great life, and it was because of the wider doorways and the roll under cooktops. And by making those type of accommodations, if you even want to call it that, early, you're actually investing in more healthy aging. And it's interesting because until my father lived with us, I didn't think of it that way either, right? I thought of it much in the traditional American sense of how we take care of our elderly population. And my father was alive as I developed the Nulu. And it was kind of fun because he could try it. And that's where I said, oh, we're focused on the disabled market. It's this bigger market. But also, he had liked to cook. And that allowed him to do some stuff. So it was very interesting. And maybe that gave me the optimism to say, wow, if more people start thinking about this, you're redefining what age looks like in many ways. And frankly, I think the future is going to be more intergenerational households. And as a result, if you want to do that and you want to stay put in that house, the funny thing is you were talking, I was thinking again about the investment side of it, to say everybody's dream is to stay in their home as long as possible, but rarely do people make the investment and use the foresight to say, here's what I need to do that. And then they get caught flat-footed when the improvements might not be financially viable at that point, or for whatever reason. The house that I bought when I moved, my dad moved in when we bought the house. We specifically had to buy with a first floor master suite for him to live with us. So we were thinking that way. And now it's funny, my wife and I are like, oh, we could just roll over where if any of our kids, because my dad never went upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms and 2 baths upstairs. There was no reason to. He didn't like steps. So why bother? That could end up a virtuous cycle and keep wealth and stuff like that within the family.
And you bring up the rise of multi-generational housing, which is very interesting because less than 100 years ago, that was the norm. It was so much the norm that nobody ever thought of doing anything else. We were primarily an agrarian society, and people lived on a farm, and what I call the Walton's model. The generations lived together under one roof and took care of each other. And the young people got the benefit of the wisdom of the older people, and the older people got the benefit of the energy and the enthusiasm and the childlike wonder of the young people, and everybody benefited.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in the last 80 years, I mean, really after World War II, and the society became more mobile, and then the rise of social programs like Social Security and Medicare, and families are spread out all over the country, and they think, oh, well, they've got Medicare to take care of them now. And that's how we got to the point where it's almost considered, well, the normal model is senior living of one kind or another. And now
it's so expensive.
It's so expensive, and nobody wants to go there. I mean, especially since COVID. I mean, with the whole issue with all of that. And so, it's coming, everything comes full circle. You wait long enough and things come back around. My grandmother used to say,
it's the other part that I love when you brought up the youth, because one thing that my wife and I are hoping that our kids get out of when my dad lived with us, and her mom and dad bought a house like really close to where we live. She passed away, and because of some health issues, he has to be in a facility. But to see us caring for them in a different way and not completely outsourcing it reinvigorates that cycle. Because I think what happens is you look and you say, well, this is just what you do. And I sometimes joke with my middle son, or my middle child, my older son, where he's like, here's the deal. Like, I'll help take care of you if you take care of yourself. And we joke about it, but there's something to that where it's sort of a contract where, I eat right, exercise, I do all those things, and I'm aging like everybody else. I have my disability challenges. So I have to alter those. But I think that when it's an agreement of, hey, I'll do everything I can to not be burdensome, but you can't phone this in, creates a different dynamic. And again, it's humorous, but I think beneath the humor, there is an aspect of generational respect that comes from that. And that then they know that their children will see them caring for us, and they learn it that way. And that the intent is to keep mom and dad or grandma and grandpa independent and engaged and included and all those kind of things that I think sometimes we lose sight of.
That's very interesting because it's has its parallel to when we as parents are parenting our kids, and they're teenagers, and we're trying to prepare them for adulthood, and they want things, and it's like, okay, well, you got to show some responsibility on the one hand before you're going to receive the right to do A, B, or C on the other hand, and you're applying that same kind of contract, if you will, to a grown child taking care of a parent. I mean, I'll be happy to take care of you, but if you're gonna sit there and eat Twinkies all day and never exercise and get diabetes and then expect me to deal with the consequences, then we
Well, and it's the financial side of it I don't hear talked about enough either. And there was some deliberate, when my dad moved in with us, and his kind of aging in place was more or less with us, was that asset preservation. That's my and my siblings, I'll say birthright if anything is left, right? He had amassed whatever he had over his lifetime, and it should go to his care, and we did that. But had he not lived with us, then The elder care industrial complex is the one that gets that birthright. And I think that there's another virtue in that is playing a part in resources being passed down from generation to generation, because you've already taken some of the cost off the table anyhow. With stuff like Social Security, when coupled with multi-generational household, you can afford a bigger house. You can afford a house that has a master suite on the first floor. Higher utility bills when distributed amongst generational, contribution aren't as big of a deal. And I think some of that plays into how people should look at it. There's the emotional side, but there should be the business side of it. You talk about home economics. Well, this is an economic decision for people where if they decide to go in a different direction, that will affect generations beyond them.
Well, the degree of financial illiteracy that we have in our society, I believe, is by design. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the whole retirement model that you work for 40 years and you build up a big pile of money, and then you stop working at the prime of your life when you have the most talent and understanding and ability and skills to produce income in the marketplace. And then you start spending down this pile of money, and you hope that, it lasts as long as you do, so that,
And that there's not a crash.
right. And it's insane.
It is. It is.
And more of the reading I'm doing, and there's just a groundswell of people saying, wait a minute, I'm very likely to live to 80, 90, 100 years old, and why at 65 would I take my talent off the table? I mean, pivot,
100%.
do something you love, do something that brings value to the marketplace, do something that you enjoy doing. But to just go home and put your feet up and sit on the porch is,
My whole team is over 50. In fact, I graduated from the academy in 93. I think two of my partners are like 86 or 87 grads. So they've got 6 years on me. I'm 55. So they're in their 60s. And I love it. When you talk about the value there, I joke a lot with them, but I also there's a couple of people I read on Substack who are starting to really, really develop brands around helping us. Again, we're all like on the AARP, right? And even that, the Association of Retired, it's just funny because I don't want to, right? I invented this in my late, well, I guess it would be early 50s. And there's a lot up here, at least until it all goes away, that I'm not ready to give up. And I do think, that really touches on how we look at aging, because aging and value, fortunately, one goes this way and one goes this way in our culture. And I love the fact that corporate America is making, in my opinion, to some degree, existential decisions to cede the field to older individuals, that then they're going to have to pay more for fractional advisement, consulting, and all that, because they're getting rid of this hugely valuable asset. It just blows my mind when I think about that model. And I get it, right? The retirement model was when there was more working in the factory or working in the field, and it just tears your body up. But medical science has also gotten better. I've got a friend who got their hip done, and they were at something the next day. So I agree with you. I think it's just a different. We have to think differently about this stuff.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think that the rise of entrepreneurship in the older population is in large part due to that. I mean, some people turn to entrepreneurship because they get laid off from corporate America, and their first reaction is to go find another job, and they're unsuccessful in doing that, and
Right.
so they turn to entrepreneurship almost as a last resort. But I think in many ways that's the way we were wired. We're all individuals, and I think the perception of seeing people and relating to people as individuals rather than as a part of some group, whatever that group may be, opens our minds to see the real value and real potential in people to a much greater extent than we're often taught.
Yeah, there was a article in ProPublica, God, I want to say a decade ago. I probably was 45 when I read it, and it talked about ageism in the workplace and how if you lose your job, expect that it's going to take you ever longer every time that happens, and you're going to get ever less every time. And that scared the crap out of me. I'll be honest. I looked and I said, I see what corporate America is, and I'm no different, right? I could be a huge performer, but it's just not how it's put together these days. So I kind of started what you were talking about early on. And it kills me when people of these older generations look and they value the stuff that you were talking about at what the marketplace they think is telling them the value, when they should know what their worth might be, 2x 3x of what they think it is. And it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because I think when you talk about, they lose their job and what am I going to do next, it's the logical next step is, hey, you know what? I will work the hours I want to work. I don't want to answer to somebody. I can speak truth to power and truth to whoever's running that organization and provide them the wisdom that they need. And I think that people can do that into their 60s, 70s, or whatever. It's funny. I showed up at a chamber event in the Chamber of Commerce in a minute. It was a young professionals, and I wasn't wearing my glasses, so I thought it was just a regular event. And I showed up, and now I'm a regular. But what's amazing is, instead of it being specifically about young professionals sharing their stuff, it's about elevating the young professionals. So it's not age gated. They see the value and, oh, here's an older guy who may have done this and made these mistakes. And, it's a chamber, right? So there's a lot of entrepreneurs. They know the value of a mistake. So they're smart enough to look at the older folks and say, how do I do this? How can I avoid this mistake? So it really, I think all the ingredients are there. For a better ecosystem to do all this, but it's whether people will put them together in the right recipe.
Yeah. So you mentioned early on about another product that you have out the table. Would you like to?
Yes, it's called Golfresco. And it's funny, it was invented, again, older group of folks in my community, all probably 50 and over. It's a golf cart community, and there's a river that the community's on. And there was a Venetian night where it's a parade of boats with the lights, and everybody's trying to juggle their food, drinks, and we were watching because the picnic tables are never where you want them. And I said, wait a minute, you could take a 2x2 trailer hitch receiver, and there are similar products out there, but mostly for trucks. And I wanted a certain style to it. I wanted it to be sort of feel like a night out. And I never really thought of it as an adaptive product. But recently, I have been looking and saying, well, wait a minute, a lot of golf cart communities are older folks. They're not going to drag a table out to have a picnic. And the part of keeping spontaneity and getting outdoors is having the right tools to not make it difficult. And my manufacturer, another West Point guy, I was lucky I found him. I think he's even older than my partners on Nulu. And he got it. He's like, I want to be part of it. So it's a pretty simple product. It's a table like you'd see in a bar or a restaurant that can slide right into the trailer hitch and or the hitch receiver, and you can ride to wherever you want to do and have a spontaneous meal or night out. And it's also usable for UTVs, where I'm a shooting enthusiast and I shoot a little air rifle. I shoot a little regular guns as well, but it makes a great shooting table. So you can put it on the back of a UTV and have a stable place to be able to do that with. Again, for me, I didn't think it would be as much as like, oh, I wouldn't drag a table out and do this. And I'm getting out more and doing that kind of stuff. So this one, my wife and I are actually kind of driving this with some help from our manufacturer, who's a partner. And what I'm really excited about is our high school here has, or our school system, District 155 here in Northwest Illinois, the Cary Crystal Lake area, has incubators for young entrepreneurs, and they have entrepreneurial programs in high school. So we're going to have two interns that are going to help us with this particular project, and they're super excited to learn from us. So maybe that's some of the spark that gets some of what we were talking about earlier ago.
Well, yeah, I love that. So when you're not using it, does it fold down? Does it stow?
You
How does
can
that
take
work?
it out. It's basically a tabletop, a stem, and a base. Very easy to take apart and put together. I find for me, I just leave it on there because hold on. I don't want my computer said it was going to die. It just plugged in the wrong thing. But oh, that's why. Sorry, 1 second. I got to make sure that I don't lose you. I had unplugged but yes, you can remove it and put it in in a bag. I'm sorry, I'm like all over the map right now trying to get this up and running so that I don't lose you. You can put it in a bag. You can put it in the back. It's really light. We constructed it out of aluminum, and the tabletop is bamboo, so it's very light. We're trying to use sustainable materials, and it is really built around convenience. The other thing we're going to look at having in 2026 is one that goes on to a lot of the newer models have what's called a grab bar, and the grab bar is kind of a semicircular thing, and we're coming up with a clamp system to work on that. But it's both websites are up, and Nulu's been up for a while. Golfresco went up a couple of months ago, and we're still refining a little bit, right? It's a typical product. We're working on some of the bugs, but we're ready to ship the product now. And one of my visions, so all of this was supposed to be in a holding company that I was going to structure like a venture studio, which is more or less an organization that have resources to give people who are developing their own products or company, and in exchange for infrastructure and consulting and all the stuff that we talked about that more mature professionals have, you get a piece of the company and help them bring stuff to market. My vision, that we'll see if I can realize it, is more of these adaptive products getting to market to kind of solve that problem we were talking at the beginning. So for me, there's a couple of other ones I have. There was a sling that I created that was another adaptive product that was hook and loop basically all over it, and you could configure it how you wanted. We ran into some challenges with how to go to market, but I really like this adaptive space, so there's probably more to come in the next couple of years.
That's great because in my industry, a lot of the products that serve aging in place all come out of Europe or they come out of Canada. There's very few innovative American accessibility or adaptive type products that
what happens is, I think nobody's about universal design and adaptive products and all those things until it impacts them, and that's the big challenge. Is it's too little too late, right? It's if and I know it's kind of a common messaging that I'm saying, but if we as a society was more about, hey, wait a minute, this impacts all of us. And as I talked about in the beginning, we're all 1 second away from serious disability in an accident or something like that. And that's not the time to think about it. One thing I think will change, and another initiative I'm working on with one foot in my Nulu business, but also a foot in the broader adaptive space, is I built an AI navigator to understand our knife. And it occurred to me one day, when I can talk to someone about it and show it to them and do all that, I'll sell a knife. When it's for them to figure out, because there is such a disconnection between this type of product and how we operate as a society, it's hard to sell it. So this is where I found AI to be very, very helpful to say, well, wait a minute, if I can put my brain into the documents that feed this and help it understand, if someone puts a recipe in there, how does it then Nuluize it where somebody with my knife can go, okay, I have to cut chicken, carrots, broccoli, and onions. What are the best ways to do this for my needs? It could tell them how to do that. If someone's looking to buy a knife, because as you know, and I'm guessing in your industry, adaptive products have a tax on them, basically, because there is not a big enough market. There isn't the economy of scale, and it's considered so specialized that people can charge more, and they do. So I've built into this AI model also an ability to find out how you might be able to get it reimbursed through Medicare or private insurance, how you might be able to borrow one from a lending library. And I want to make it sort of a one-stop place where people can go and say, not just how do I use it, here are my specific needs and challenges. I have vision issues. Like, this is me. I have vision issues. I have grip issues. Depending on the day, I may have other upper extremity issues. How can I help understand day to day how to better use it? And where I would like to get to is that this becomes the model for everything. Because if somebody has a stroke and all of a sudden they have some degree of bilateral paralysis, but maybe one arm is worse, and they have to sit down, and their life changes overnight, there should be a tool for they or a caretaker to say, here's their ability profile, give me an understanding of all the products available to help them live better, how to use them, how to get reimbursed. Because, and this is where when people talk about AI taking jobs, you and I both know that the world of adaptive products and the infrastructure around it is understaffed, under-resourced. So that's where all this should flow to create a mechanism where now you've got people who are subject matter experts with hyper accelerated tools that can help them do this kind of thing, where people can understand it. And maybe it's even in the construction industry. Here's this person's budget. Here's this person's challenges. How can I maximize a renovation that would be for adaptive accessibility and all that? There's just nothing out there. So it's a hugely time consuming and difficult process, because going full circle, Amazon, the largest retailer in the US, probably the world, has no adaptive category. That's crazy. So where I've kind of, a lot of my partners are working a little bit more on our product these days, where I, thanks to my ADHD, am more in, okay, why are we not selling knives, right? They're kind of looking at the brand and all. And this is with, we are growing 20 to 30% month over month as we sell, but we're still in the walking stage. I want to create an ecosystem for our knife, because we're coming out with an adaptive cutting board and all that, where people look and they say, oh, this is a frictionless type purchase. This is the right product for me. And that, I understand them, and I've created the right tools for them, and they understand the product, and it's this great connection. That should be everything in this space, right? It should be everywhere. And you can see the undercurrent of, like, kitchen, people who review kitchen items, like we were talking about earlier. There's nowhere where you can find this type of information. And you see it every day, probably. My guess is you get super busy because there's no shortage of people who are aging into disability.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first step before, aging into needing the mortuary.
Right. And a lot of times we get calls like very far along on the continuum, where people are finally decided to pick up the phone and seek some solutions.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course.
So how many times, and this is my real estate geek thinking, how many times do people do it gradually, where they go to someone like you and say, I know I have to do all of these projects. This is my urgent one now. And they do that, and then work, over time, right? Because my guess is it's kind of like, we have to make the house accessible. And it's just like one big thing. And then you see the bill and it's like, I can't do that. But I'm guessing, oh, you know what? We'll do the bathroom this year and make it accessible from Jump Street. Do people ever do that? Or why do people not do that?
People that think that way are almost 100% people like yourself who have been a caregiver and understand what the other side of the equation feels like, and have seen what it's like taking care of someone who, has mobility challenges, maybe in a house that's not well suited for that. And so they get it and they want to have it in place. I mean, that's what I encourage people. But people that have not been a caregiver, or people that have not really personally seen anyone struggling with these issues, typically bury their head in the sand, and they don't think about it, because they don't want to think about getting weaker and sicker. And my goal is to change the paradigm of how we view aging and help more and more people come to the conclusion that getting older is a wonderful thing. Everybody wants to live a long life. Nobody wants to get older. And, we have every day that we wake up and we're alive and we're breathing air and we're still on this side of eternity is a gift and a blessing. And if we look at it that way, then we will see the glass being half full and we will see all the blessings that we have and we will see what we have still to give to the world. There's a guy on YouTube and his slogan is, if you ain't dead, you ain't done.
I love that. I love that. I love
Right?
that.
And I think that, that needs to be shouted from the rooftops. People need to, just be aware that, life is a gift, and squeeze as much life out of every day that you can. And that the home is as a place for the rest of your life to happen can be an environment that enhances that process or that becomes a stumbling block in that process. And encouraging people to create home environments that enhance that process early on so that the home is a backdrop for a purposeful and fulfilling life rather than a hindrance and a source of difficulty.
Totally.
Is
Well, it's interesting that on the caretaker side, there's rarely the economics done in their mind. And I'm going more from my knife, but if you're taking care of someone who cannot prepare a meal, you're preparing the meals for them. That's now your time and all of that. So it was always interesting for me because, again, I tend to think a little bit differently. I'm a little bit neurodivergent with the ADHD and other stuff, but I think differently. For me, it's always about optimization. How can I optimize the things I do? It's for some reason that it's something I'm obsessed with. But thinking that way, I always would look and say, well, wait a minute. Any minute he can do something for himself is a minute that I have back. And it's also a removal of a friction point that may not be the fault of the person being cared for. It's baked into a irrational resentment of having to be a caretaker because of the way that our world is set up, or at least our society here in the US. And so for me, it was always about, wow, yes, like I would love grandma and grandpa and everyone to live as fulfilling a life in their age as they can. It should be everything. But also then how do I minimize the impact on me, which is what they want as well. But I think sometimes people they're afraid they'll appear selfish, maybe, as opposed to saying there's a practicality and a pragmatism to looking and saying there's the emotional level and the business level. When I was in lending, I used to do lending in the divorce space. And I would always try and tell divorcing people, you have to separate the emotion on the house from selling the house. And there's two different sides of it. I think in aging, there's some of that too, is to say, okay, let's figure out this math problem. There's X amount of time in the day. How do we maximize the amount of time that this person can be independent, have their own autonomy, do what they want to do, and therefore that maximizes what I have. And I think that's a great discussion to have that no one does.
And it comes down to family dynamics, and a lot of those dynamics become very emotionally charged because of how people, again, hang their identity on certain roles and certain ways that we interact with each other. And maybe that changes over time. The parent-child relationship often changes over time, and that can be very emotionally charged. And if it's not talked about, if your family dynamic is such that we don't talk about these things, and then resentments build up and problems, simmer under the surface until there's a blow up, then everybody gets mad when, it doesn't have to be that way.
You're totally right.
Yeah.
After my dad passed, I had an idea for a business of almost consulting families on that earlier edge of when you're thinking of aging in place, but not the normal way of like, okay, here's products and here's the plan. It was more, and I love that the name of this podcast actually aligns with where the business thought was, is what does the team look like? And if you have siblings, what resources do any of them have to give? Sometimes it's just someone is not competent or emotionally able to give. Sometimes maybe they have small kids. but having that discussion, because you don't want the person or people aging to feel like they're the source of this friction between siblings, but also in a setting before resentment builds, creating a capability to say, one sibling says, I just have nothing to give. Well, that's great. And they shouldn't be judged on it. But in terms of how resources are allocated after someone passes, let's say, maybe that has an impact on it. And I got mixed reviews on it, but many people said it's a right way to go because it's an open book. And those just, so you said those things are not going to go away later, but it will create, and in some ways the matriarch or patriarch of the family or both have to say there is a value in me being cared for, and there's going to be a set aside to I hate to use the term reward, but to compensate the person for lost time, opportunity cost of job or whatever, right? Because the person has to be cared for. And I think some of what fails on any of this stuff, whether it's my knife or or renovation or whatever, where some of that fails is where everybody's not aligned in how they're thinking and talking and planning on the emotional level, the financial level, and the applied execution of how they're going to have that person age in place.
Douglas, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we could probably go on for another hour without losing
I
stride.
agree.
But in the interest of time, tell the listeners where they can find out more about your product.
Nulu is at nuluknives.com, where you can purchase us from our website or on Amazon. We just rolled out some new products. We have a cutting board with a bowl in it, like you were describing, and a dock. It's a stand for the knife. We call it a dock, cutting gloves, and our own board wax. So all of those are available on our site. Everything's soon to be available on Amazon. Right now, you can get a knife, and we do have a sharpener that we recommend. So that's nuluknives.com, and our store on Amazon is just Nulu, I think. Golfresco.
Is that Nulu?
Yes, sir. It's nuluknives.com.
Okay.
And then Golfresco, Golfresco.com is our website. Social stuff is up. We're selling just right now through the website, but we've got some kind of pictures if it was hard to imagine what it looks like for some of your listeners and such. My personal site has all of that stuff there. It's douglasmkatz.com. It's got two of the talks that I've been working on, one about ability and the ability curve that we discussed. And the other is on, I talked about my ADHD. The other one is on that and harnessing it as a benefit, which has helped me as an entrepreneur. And then the access to our Nulu Navigator beta is there. It is early stage, but if someone is thinking of using the knife, they can play with the AI there. We keep no information, just I think the IP address where it comes from. So our goal is not to get spam, it's to get good feedback. And there's an anonymous feedback forum if people want to check that out there. So I think that covers everything. And I have a pretty broad digital footprint. So if you put in my name, you'll likely find a podcast appearance, something I've published or otherwise. There is a James Beard chef by the name of Douglas Katz, not me, but the other Douglas Katz, I guess.
Well, it doesn't sound like you have the problem I have. There's probably thousands of Chris Moores in the world.
Yes,
So,
yes.
it's a very common name. So we will put all of these websites in the show notes. And thanks again for being here, Douglas, on Aging in Place is a Team Sport.